Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a story that's not just about death or money. It's about what happens when the people you love the most start measuring your worth in property value. You probably won't survive this story, not emotionally at least. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Right now, wherever you are, maybe sitting in your kitchen, maybe lying on your bed somewhere. Quiet. Imagine this. You're at a family dinner that used to feel warm, familiar, maybe even safe. But tonight, every smile hides a knife. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. It began at my own dining table, the one I bought 30 years ago, when life was still simple, and my children still fought over crayons, not inheritance. The clock ticked louder than usual that evening. Maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it was the silence growing between us like mold. My 3 children sat across from me, 2 sons and 1 daughter, and though their faces were familiar, their eyes looked like strangers. We were eating roast chicken, though no one tasted it. Forks scraped plates, but words refused to come out. I noticed the way my eldest son Daniel glanced at the wall clock every few seconds, like he had somewhere better to be. My daughter Lisa pretended to pour me wine just to avoid looking at me. The youngest Michael scrolled on his phone under the table, thinking I couldn't see. When I finally spoke, I only said, "Eat while it's warm." A simple sentence, but it echoed in the room like a command. And yet no one moved, because they all knew what tonight was about. It wasn't dinner, it was strategy. I had told them earlier that I'd called everyone here to discuss arrangements. That word alone, arrangements, was enough to turn family into rivals. You could almost smell the tension. You see, family dinners are supposed to be about connection, but in many households they're battlegrounds disguised as routine. Studies even show that when inheritance enters the conversation, siblings who once played together as children can stop speaking for decades. I read that in a family counseling article once, how property can turn blood into cold paperwork. People still debate whether it's human nature or just modern greed. I tried to start with something light. "Lisa," I said, "how's the new cafe business?" She smiled, but it was that customer service smile, the kind that says, "Let's pretend to care until the bill comes." "It's doing okay, Dad," she said softly, cutting her food into tiny pieces she didn't eat. Daniel added quickly, "You know, Dad, maybe you could invest a bit more in her place. Wouldn't hurt, right?" His voice was polite, but the sarcasm was a sharp edge. Lisa shot him a look that could cut glass. "Don't worry," she said. "I won't be asking you for advice." The youngest Michael laughed nervously. "Can we not start this again? We're here for dinner, not a board meeting." But even he couldn't hide his curiosity when I took out the small envelope. The sound of paper rubbing together froze everyone. I placed it on the table and said, "This is my updated estate plan." No one breathed for a moment. Daniel leaned forward slightly, Lisa stopped mid-chew, and Michael's phone screen dimmed into silence. I didn't say another word. I just watched their faces, the way Daniel's jaw clenched, how Lisa's eyes darted toward me, and how Michael swallowed hard, like his throat had turned dry. That envelope, plain and unremarkable, was more powerful than anything I'd ever owned. When I was younger, I thought love could survive anything. I thought if you gave enough money, shelter, education, your children would grow into grateful adults. But that's not always how it works. Sometimes giving too much becomes the first mistake. Because when people never have to earn, they forget how to appreciate. I once read about an old Japanese custom where elders give away most of their possessions before death, not to test loyalty, but to teach acceptance. to teach their children that love doesn't come with receipts. Maybe that's where I went wrong. Daniel broke the silence first. So, Dad, are we supposed to open it now? His tone was too casual to be innocent. Lisa snapped back. Maybe let him say something first, Daniel. You always think everything's about you. Because it usually is, he replied coldly. Michael sighed, his head dropping into his hands. Here we go again. I should have laughed, it was so painfully predictable, but instead I felt this dull ache in my chest. It wasn't illness, not yet, just the realization that the family I built was crumbling in slow motion right in front of me while the roast grew cold. I told them calmly, "No, we won't open it tonight. This isn't about who gets what. It's about how you'll behave before that moment comes." Lisa frowned. "Behave?" she repeated. "You make it sound like we're on trial." "Maybe we are," I said. "Maybe love is the evidence." That got a bitter laugh out of Daniel. "Well, that's vague enough for you, Dad. You always liked your little riddles." He picked up his wine glass, took a sip, and muttered, "If you really wanted peace, you wouldn't dangle that thing in front of us." He wasn't wrong, and I knew it. But I wasn't testing them to punish them. I was testing them because I needed to know when I was gone who they'd become. Would they be kind, or just successful scavengers? The line between the two gets blurry when money sits on the table. By the time dessert came, apple pie, their mother's old recipe, no one touched it. The air was thick with unsaid words. Lisa finally stood up and said, "I think I've lost my appetite." She took her purse, kissed my cheek mechanically, and walked out. Daniel didn't even look at me when he followed her. Michael stayed for a moment longer, his voice quiet. "Dad, you know this isn't going to end well, right?" I smiled faintly. "That's the point," I said. "Sometimes endings are the only way to see people clearly." After he left, I sat alone, staring at the empty chairs. The flicker of candlelight threw long shadows across the table, and for the first time, I wondered if this was how my own father had felt. He died before making a will. It tore our family apart. Maybe I thought I was preventing history from repeating itself, but maybe I was just building a new tragedy, one signature at a time. Outside, a storm began to rumble. I listened to it and felt strangely calm, because even if my children saw me as a dying man with assets, I still had something they didn't time. Not much of it, but enough to play my final move. And as I blew out the last candle, I realized something simple but cruel: silence was the most expensive gift I could give them. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my old clock ticking a rhythm, too steady for a house that had just survived a storm. The dining table was still cluttered from last night, wine stains bleeding into the wood like old secrets. I didn't clean it. Maybe I wanted the evidence to stay. Maybe I wanted to look at it one more time before walking into what would soon become a battlefield of paperwork. I had an appointment with my lawyer that day. His name was Peter Lang, a man I'd known for 30 years, and the only person left who still looked at me as something other than a walking inheritance. When I arrived at his office, the smell of old leather and stale coffee filled the air. He smiled when he saw me, the kind of smile that carries both pity and professionalism. "Morning, sir," he said, motioning me to sit. "I assume this is about the revisions." I nodded, placing the envelope on his desk. It was heavier than it should have been, as if guilt had weight. "You know, Peter," I said, slowly, "I never thought I'd be one of those fathers who changes his will in secret." He chuckled softly, flipping through the papers. "It's more common than you think. Families can be unpredictable when money's involved." I leaned back in the chair, staring at the wall where a framed diploma hung slightly crooked. "Unpredictable," I repeated. "That's a polite way to say they turn into animals." He didn't argue. Lawyers never do when you're telling the truth. As he adjusted his glasses, I remembered reading once that nearly 70% of family wealth disappears within 2 generations. Not because of taxes or poor investments, but because of conflict. The data had shocked me at the time, but now it made too much sense. People still debate whether it's greed or grief that causes it, but I think it's both. Losing someone forces people to face themselves, and not everyone likes what they see in that mirror. Peter started typing notes, his fingers clacking across the keyboard like little hammers, sealing my family's fate. So he said, "What exactly are we changing?" I looked out the window. The city below was alive. Cars, honking strangers crossing streets, people chasing purpose. "We're not changing much," I replied. "Just enough to see who they really are." He paused, raising an eyebrow. "That sounds ominous." "It's not," I said. "It's clarity." I told him I wanted to add a clause that my assets would only be distributed once all 3 of my children had completed a list of tasks, nothing illegal, nothing cruel, but things that required patience, empathy, and cooperation. I wanted them to sell the old vacation house together, donate part of the proceeds to charity, and handle one of my investments as a team. Peter listened carefully, his brow furrowing. "You're turning your inheritance into a moral exercise," he said. "Exactly," I replied. "If they can't work together while I'm alive, at least let them learn when I'm gone." He tapped his pen on the desk, thinking. "You know that could backfire, right? These things often do." I smiled. "I know. But failure is also a kind of truth." He printed out the new draft, the fresh ink filling the room with that sharp chemical scent of bureaucracy. It was strange how something that decides your family's future comes out of a printer like a grocery receipt. We went over each page carefully. My name, my children's names. The assets, the clause. Peter spoke in that calm, detached tone of professionals who've seen every kind of human drama. He told me about a case where a father left his entire fortune to his dog just to prove a point. "You wouldn't believe the chaos that caused," he said. I laughed genuinely this time. I might actually believe it. As we wrapped up, he looked at me curiously. "You ever wonder why people cling to inheritance so desperately?" "All the time," I said. "It's because death makes everyone feel poor. Money feels like the only thing they can still control." I signed the papers, and for a moment the pen trembled in my hand. I'm not sure if it was age or hesitation. Peter noticed but said nothing. When it was done, he placed the final document in a sealed envelope. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "As sure as a dying man can be." We both chuckled, though I wasn't really joking. On my way home, I stopped at a small cafe, the one Lisa used to love before she opened her own. I ordered coffee, sat by the window, and watched the rain slide down the glass. Everything looked blurred, like the world was trying to soften its edges for me. I thought about my father again, how he left us nothing but a fishing boat and a house we couldn't afford to keep. We sold it, fought over the money, and didn't speak for years. I swore I'd never repeat that mistake, but maybe I'd only found a more sophisticated way to make the same one. A couple next to me argued quietly over a bill. The man insisted on paying. The woman resisted. It made me smile, love, pride, and control, all mixed up in one small moment. Family always looks simple from the outside until you know what's being fought over. That night, I sat in my study with the revised will locked in the drawer. My hands shook slightly as I poured myself a drink. Whiskey my doctor would have disapproved, but I needed something to cut the loneliness. I wondered if my children would ever understand why I did this. Probably not. They'd say I was being manipulative or cruel, but they'd miss the point. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was trying to prepare them. There's a saying in my culture, you don't measure a man by what he leaves behind, but by what he teaches before he leaves. I wanted that to be true, even if it wasn't. When the clock struck midnight, I glanced at the drawer again and thought of the envelope from the night before. It sat quietly in the dark, waiting. Somewhere inside that stack of paper was the future of 3 people who used to call me Dad with love, and now said it with calculation. I took one last sip of whiskey, let the burn travel down my throat, and whispered to the empty room, "Let the game begin." Lisa showed up 2 days later, unannounced. I was in the garden pruning roses, an old habit that made me feel useful. The sky was gray, the kind that promises rain but never delivers. I heard the gate creak, and when I turned, she was standing there, expensive shoes, flawless makeup, and eyes full of something I couldn't read. She smiled that same practiced smile from dinner. "Dad," she said softly, "can we talk?" There was something about her tone that made me nervous. Children don't ask to talk unless they want something or feel guilty. And Lisa rarely felt guilty. I nodded toward the porch. "You know where the tea is," I said. We sat under the awning, the table between us, still bearing the faint ring of coffee cups from my solitude. She talked about her cafe, first renovations, new suppliers, the challenges of keeping good staff. I listened, or at least pretended to, because beneath her words I could hear the rhythm of a different language, the one of persuasion. She was building context before the request. It's an old tactic, and parents recognize it even if they never name it. Finally, she exhaled, looked straight at me and said, "Dad, I think Daniel's been trying to convince you I don't deserve anything." I said nothing. Silence is an underrated weapon. It makes people show their cards faster. She leaned in. "He always thinks he's smarter, that just because he's the eldest, everything should go to him. But you know I'm the one who visits you, right? I'm the one who checks in." I smiled faintly. "You mean like today?" She flinched a little but recovered. "No, I mean, I've always cared about you." It wasn't untrue. Lisa did care, but selectively. She was the type who sent gifts instead of time, who measured affection in gestures that looked good on Instagram. Still, she was my daughter, and there was warmth somewhere under the layers of calculation. I poured her tea, the sound of liquid filling the silence between us. "Lisa," I said, "why does everyone suddenly care so much about what I leave behind?" She froze, eyes darting down to her cup. "That's not what this is about," she whispered. "I just don't want Daniel and Michael to manipulate you." The irony was almost poetic. "Manipulate me?" I asked gently. "And what are you doing right now?" Her face changed just a flicker, but I saw it. A child caught between pride and fear. Then she looked away toward the garden. "You're not being fair," she said quietly. "You don't know how they talk about you when you're not around." I did know, actually. I'd heard enough from the neighbors, from the way my sons' wives avoided my calls, from the tone of text messages that sounded more like business updates. Families always leak even when no one intends to. But hearing Lisa try to weaponize my loneliness against her brothers, that hurt in a different way. "You know, I said there's a strange thing about inheritance law in this country." She glanced at me, confused. "What do you mean?" I sipped my tea slowly. "If a parent dies without a will, the law divides everything equally among the children. But if the parent has a will, the choices he makes can either unite or destroy them." She frowned. "That's why you need to be careful, Dad." "Because Daniel—" I interrupted. "Lisa, you're not worried about Daniel. You're worried about fairness, your version of it. The same way he's worried about his version." Her eyes glistened, but I couldn't tell if it was emotion or strategy. "I just want what's right." "People always do," I said softly. "But what's right isn't always what's deserved." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain finally began light and steady, tapping the roof like a metronome for our silence. Lisa started tracing the rim of her cup with one finger, avoiding my gaze. "Dad," she murmured, "you're not planning to cut me out, are you?" That question hit me like a nail through the chest. It wasn't the words, it was the fear behind them. It told me she didn't trust me anymore. Maybe she never did. I thought about answering, but instead I asked her something different. "Lisa, when was the last time we talked about something that wasn't money?" She looked up, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" I said, when was the last time you asked how I was really doing? Or told me about something you loved that didn't involve business or competition?" She bit her lip, thinking. And that silence was the answer. In families like ours, love slowly becomes transactional. It happens so subtly that no one notices until it's irreversible. Psychologists call it conditional affection, where relationships depend on what's given, not what's felt. People still debate whether it's learned behavior or a symptom of modern living. I think it's both. Lisa tried to recover the conversation by laughing awkwardly. "You're being dramatic, Dad. You always make things sound deeper than they are." I smiled. That's what happens when you have more time to think than to live. She didn't laugh this time. Instead, she reached across the table and held my hand. "I don't want us to fight," she said softly. For a second, it almost felt real. Her voice, her touch, the way her thumb brushed my wrist. But then she added, "I just don't want Daniel to win." And there it was, the truth buried in sentiment. I gently withdrew my hand. "Lisa," I said, "life isn't a game you can win. You can only lose slower than others." She sighed, frustrated. "You're impossible." "I know," I said. "That's why you're here." She stood up abruptly, rainwater dripping off her coat as she walked toward the gate. Before leaving, she turned back and said, "You always think you're teaching us something, but maybe you're just making it harder to love you." Her words stayed with me long after she was gone. They weren't cruel. They were honest. And honesty, I've learned, is the sharpest weapon in any inheritance battle. When the rain stopped, I looked at the roses I'd pruned earlier. Their petals glistened, their stems bleeding tiny drops of water. I thought of Lisa, beautiful, fragile, but full of thorns. As I locked the gate behind her, I whispered to myself, 1 down, 2 to go. It didn't take long for the next act to begin. A few days after Lisa's visit, Daniel called me something he rarely did, unless it was urgent or beneficial. "Dad," he said, his voice too smooth to be casual. "Michael and I thought we'd drop by this weekend. Maybe take you out for lunch." I almost laughed. The last time my sons agreed on anything, they were 10 years old and trying to hide a broken window. "Sure," I said. "Come by Sunday. I'll make stew." They arrived together, which was already suspicious. Daniel in his usual pressed shirt and cologne that screamed self-importance, and Michael with his relaxed posture and anxious smile. I could tell from the way they exchanged glances at the door that they'd rehearsed this visit. We sat in the living room, and for a while they pretended it was about family. Daniel talked about work. His company was merging with another firm, he said. Michael mentioned his new apartment conveniently close to Daniel's office. I listened, nodding, waiting for the real reason they'd come. It arrived after 15 minutes like clockwork. "So, Dad," Daniel began, "we've been talking. We just want to make sure you're comfortable with how everything's set up. You know, with the will." There it was. Michael jumped in quickly, trying to soften it. "We're not saying you need to change anything. We just want to make sure no one's taking advantage of you. No one. Meaning Lisa." I could almost hear her name hanging in the air, unsaid but heavy. "Ah," I said, "so you've formed an alliance." They exchanged nervous smiles. "Not an alliance," Daniel said. "Just family communication. Funny, I replied. That's what the Roman Senate used to say before they stabbed Caesar. Michael chuckled awkwardly, but Daniel didn't. Dad, come on. We just want what's fair. There it was again, that cursed word fair. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. And what exactly does fair mean to you two? Danielle didn't hesitate. It means dividing things logically. The house should probably go to me since I can manage it. Lisa gets some cash for her cafe, and Michael, well, he doesn't need much right now. Michael frowned. Excuse me, I didn't agree to that. Yes, you did, Daniel snapped. You literally said last night you don't want property. You'd rather have some investment shares. Michael's face turned red. That's not the same as saying you should take everything else I watched them sipping my tea like it was a front-row ticket to a Shakespearean tragedy. I'd read somewhere that 40% of adult siblings experience long-term estrangement after a parent's death due to disputes like this. People still debate whether it's money or unresolved childhood wounds that cause it. Personally, I think it's both. The money just gives the wounds a microphone. Boys, I said, raising my hand, you're fighting over things that aren't even yours yet. Doesn't that feel strange? Daniel scoffed. We're just being practical, Dad. You always said to plan ahead. I also said not to build a house before the land is yours, I reminded him. He ignored the warning. Look, we just want to protect the family assets. Lisa's business could go under any day, and you know she'll come running for more money. We're just trying to prevent that. Michael nodded hesitantly. She's not great with finances, Dad. I smiled, not because I agreed, but because I could see how easy it was for greed to dress itself as responsibility. And what about you two? Are you great with family? That shut them up for a moment. Daniel cleared his throat. Dad, you're making this sound worse than it is. We're just trying to avoid drama. I raised an eyebrow. You're trying to avoid losing. He leaned forward. You think this is all about money, don't you? Isn't it? I asked quietly. For a moment the room went still. Then Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. Maybe it is. But it's not just the money. It's about what it represents. And what's that? He hesitated. Validation. Daniel shot him a glare, but I caught it honesty slipping through. Michael had always been the most sensitive of the three, the one who still remembered birthdays and asked about my health, but he was also the one who grew up in Daniel's shadow. Maybe inheritance wasn't about wealth to him, it was about acknowledgement. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. You know, in some cultures, the eldest child automatically inherits everything. The logic is that they're supposed to carry the family name and protect the rest. But it often leads to jealousy and resentment. People still debate whether tradition or equality makes a stronger family. I think it depends on who's doing the protecting. Daniel looked uncomfortable. So, what are you saying, Dad? You're not following tradition, or you are. I smiled faintly. You'll see. He hated that answer. Daniel was the type who thrived on control. The idea that I might have a plan he couldn't predict was unbearable to him. He stood up abruptly. You know what? Maybe this was a mistake. We came here to talk, not to be interrogated. Then you shouldn't have come with an agenda, I said calmly. Michael tried to defuse it. Guys, can we just stop, please? But Daniel was already at the door. Whatever you're planning, Dad, he said. I hope you realize you're setting us up to hate each other. I watched him leave that familiar mix of arrogance and fear clinging to his shoulders. When the door slammed, the house felt heavier. Michael stayed behind, staring at the floor. He's not wrong, he said quietly. Maybe not, I admitted. But sometimes you have to break things to see what they're made of. He looked up, confused. That sounds cruel. It's not, I said. It's necessary, he sighed. I just wish we could all stop acting like vultures. Wishes are free, I replied. Inheritance isn't. When he left, I poured myself another cup of tea and stared out the window at the street beyond. The sky had turned pale blue, the kind that hides storms behind politeness. I realized something then. Daniel and Lisa might fight for power, but Michael would fight for peace. And peace in families like ours never wins easily. That night, as I wrote notes in my ledger, I added one new entry under observation: sons united by fear of losing, not love of me. It's funny how quickly private pain becomes public entertainment. Within a week, I couldn't walk down my own street without feeling the weight of whispers. My neighbors' people who'd once shared soup recipes and gardening tips now greeted me with the kind of pity reserved for someone dying of more than just illness. Rumors travel faster than ambulances in small communities, and apparently word had spread that I was rearranging my will. That word alone was enough to turn afternoon tea into a gossip Olympics. It began subtly. Mrs. Howard from next door suddenly brought me fresh baked cookies. She'd never baked a day in her life, at least not successfully. Then Mr. Green, the retired banker across the street, started offering unsolicited advice about asset preservation. Even the mailman, bless his nosy soul, began delivering my letters with a knowing smile. I could almost hear them all whispering, "His kids are fighting already." Poor old man. But what none of them realized was that I wasn't a victim of the drama. I was the director. That Sunday I attended church, something I hadn't done regularly since my wife passed. It wasn't about faith this time. It was reconnaissance. Small-town churches are where gossip blossoms into prophecy. Sure enough, after the sermon, while sipping lukewarm coffee in the courtyard, I overheard snippets that made my heart ache and laugh at the same time. Apparently, the daughter's bankrupt. I heard the eldest son's pushing for control. They say he's hiding a second will. Imagine fighting before the poor man's even gone. People still debate whether gossip strengthens or destroys a community. I think it does both. It connects people through curiosity, but kills compassion in the process. As I stood there pretending to stir sugar into my cup, Pastor James approached me with his usual cautious smile. "Brother," he said softly, "you holding up all right? Folks have been concerned." "Concerned?" I asked, smiling. "Or entertained?" He chuckled awkwardly, caught between truth and politeness. "You know how people are." "Oh, I do," I said. "They love a good tragedy, especially when it's not theirs." He patted my shoulder like one would pet an aging dog. "You've raised good children. They'll figure it out." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed him. Good children, yes, but love can't survive where trust has died, and mine had been buried somewhere between Daniel's ambition, Lisa's pride, and Michael's exhaustion. That evening, as I watered the roses again, I saw Mrs. Howard peeking through her curtains. I waved. She ducked like a spy caught mid-surveillance. I almost laughed out loud, but laughter has a strange echo. When you're alone, it sounds like someone else mocking you. Later, while making dinner, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to. "Hello," I said. A woman's voice replied, hesitant but familiar. "Mr. Carter, this is Evelyn from the community center. I just wanted to remind you about the seniors' financial workshop tomorrow. Your daughter signed you up." Of course she did. Lisa never missed an opportunity to stage manage my image. "I'll be there," I said. The workshop was about estate management. How poetic. A dozen gray-haired attendees sat in folding chairs listening to a young financial advisor who looked barely old enough to rent a car. He spoke about wills, taxes, and probate, with the enthusiasm of a man selling vacuum cleaners. Remember, he said, without proper planning, your assets could go into dispute for years. I almost laughed again. Years, try decades. Then he mentioned something interesting, a cultural study about how inheritance disputes spike in families with more than one business owner or entrepreneur. Apparently, success breeds competition, not gratitude. He said, the more self-made children a person has, the less likely they are to cooperate after that person's death. That struck me hard. I had raised independent thinkers, fighters, and dreamers. I thought I was teaching them strength, but maybe I'd just armed them for war. People still debate whether strong parenting creates unity or rivalry. I used to think I knew the answer. Now I wasn't so sure. After the session, Evelyn approached me. "You okay, Mr. Carter?" You looked deep in thought, just remembering something I said. "What's that?" "That every good intention eventually comes with a receipt." She smiled politely, probably unsure whether to laugh or look concerned. That night I returned home and found a note under my door. Lisa's handwriting. Neat, careful. It read, "Dad, I hope you're taking care of yourself. Daniel told me he's worried you're being influenced. Please, call me." I folded the note neatly and placed it next to the one Daniel had sent 2 days earlier, which said almost the same thing but blamed her. If they both thought I was being manipulated, then maybe I was doing something right. Before going to bed, I turned on the local radio. They were running a segment about cultural inheritance. Customs apparently in Ghana. Families sometimes hold living funerals, where the elderly person listens to everything their family would say at their real funeral. I imagined sitting through that, hearing my children's speeches, trying to tell which ones were sincere. I wondered if I'd laugh or cry. Probably both. The next morning when I stepped outside, Mr. Green was waiting by the fence. "Morning, neighbor," he said cheerfully. "Heard your boys visited last week?" I nodded. "They did? Good lads, those two. Always polite. Must make you proud." "Some days," I replied. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, I hope you've got your paperwork sorted. Families can get ugly when money's involved. Happened to my cousin. They're still not speaking." I smiled thinly. "Don't worry, Mr. Green. I'm documenting everything." He laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. Inside, I scribbled another note in my ledger. "The neighborhood knows more about my family than my family does." And for some reason that thought didn't bother me. It amused me. Because while everyone else thought they were watching a tragedy, they didn't realize they were part of my experiment. Every whisper, every glance, every rumor was just another confirmation of how predictable people become when money's scent is in the air. As I closed my notebook, I whispered to myself, "Let them talk. Words cost nothing. Truth will cost them more." It happened on a Thursday. I was trimming the hedge when the world suddenly tilted. One second I was upright, feeling the morning sun on my back. The next I was staring at the ground, the shears lying beside me like fallen weapons. A neighbor's voice, distant, distorted, called my name. When I woke again, I was in a hospital bed, the air smelling of disinfectant and fluorescent light. My chest felt heavy, my arm tethered by an IV line. I wasn't afraid, just tired. The nurse smiled when she saw me open my eyes. "Welcome back," she said, cheerful in that way hospital staff are trained to be. "You had quite a scare." "Mild heart episode, but you're stable now." "Mild." It's strange how a word can feel so heavy and light at the same time. Within hours, all 3 of my children arrived. I suppose nothing brings family together faster than the possibility of death. Lisa was first, hair slightly disheveled, phone still in hand. Daniel followed, crisp as always, tie perfectly knotted even in crisis. Michael came last, out of breath, face, pale eyes red. Seeing them all together again felt like a cosmic joke. They stood at the foot of my bed like witnesses waiting for testimony. "Dad," Lisa whispered, touching my hand gently. "How are you feeling alive?" I said, which seems to disappoint everyone's schedule. Daniel forced a smile. "Don't say that. You scared us." Michael just looked at me, eyes full of quiet panic. "They said you collapsed," he murmured. "Why didn't you tell us you weren't feeling well?" "Because I didn't want to give them another reason to argue about my body, the way they argued about my house." "I'm fine," I said. "The doctor says it's just stress." Daniel exhaled. "Well, maybe you shouldn't be doing yard work at your age." Lisa shot him a glare. "He's fine, Daniel. Don't start." "Oh, relax," Daniel said, waving her off. "I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying he should take it easy." Michael finally snapped, his voice trembling. "Can you two not do this here? He just had a heart issue." Their bickering stopped briefly. The silence that followed was heavier than the oxygen tank beside my bed. Hospitals have a strange way of stripping people down, not just physically, but emotionally. I've seen families fall apart in waiting rooms over things as small as hospital bills and as big as regrets. I remembered reading once that 80% of people over 60 say their biggest fear isn't death, it's dying, surrounded by people who are only there for closure. People still debate whether that's morbid or honest. I think it's just human. The doctor entered then, a young man with glasses too big for his face. "Mr. Carter, you'll need rest and monitoring for a few days," he said. "You're lucky it was mild." "Luck," I muttered. "Has terrible timing." He smiled politely, made a few notes, and left us alone again. Daniel was the first to break the silence. "Dad," he said cautiously about the will. "Not now." Lisa snapped. "What? I'm just saying." "Daniel, shut up." Michael stood between them, his voice rising for the first time I'd ever heard. "He just almost died, and you're thinking about paperwork." Daniel glared at him. "You think I don't care about him? Do you?" Michael shot back, and that was it. Years of resentment exploded in a sterile room that smelled like antiseptic and heart monitors. Lisa started crying not soft movie tears, but angry ones. Daniel's voice rose sharp and defensive. Michael's hands were trembling. I lay there too weak to intervene, watching my children unravel like badly stitched fabric. When a nurse rushed in to calm them, I pretended to sleep. It was easier than trying to stop them. Later that night, when the lights dimmed and the machines hummed in rhythm with my pulse, I opened my eyes again. Michael was still there, sitting quietly in the chair by my bed, scrolling on his phone with one hand and holding mine with the other. "You stayed," I said softly. He looked up, startled. "Of course I did. You didn't have to." "I know," he replied. "That's why I did." That made me smile. "You sound like your mother." He chuckled. "She'd kill you for scaring us like that. She'd probably kill me, for letting you all fight like this," I said. He hesitated. "Dad, do you really think we'd be fighting if Mom were still here?" I thought about it. "No. But she would have been the reason you pretended not to." He nodded slowly. "You think this is about money, don't you?" "Everything is eventually," I said. "Even love, if you're not careful." He didn't argue. Just squeezed my hand a little tighter. At 2 a.m., I woke again to hear voices in the hallway. Daniel and Lisa. They thought I was asleep. "I told you he's not changing anything," Daniel whispered. "You don't know that," Lisa hissed. "He's been acting strange lately. Strange how secretive. Writing notes, talking to that lawyer friend again. So what? He has every right." "He does," she said bitterly. "But if he leaves everything split 3 ways, you'll be fine. I won't." "That's not my problem, Lisa. It will be when I tell him about your little offshore account." I closed my eyes again and smiled faintly. So, that's what this was about. Insurance against each other, not care for me. Every family has its breaking point, and ours was apparently in the hospital corridor. In some cultures, there's a belief that when someone is close to death, they can see people's true souls, shadows behind their faces. Maybe it's just poetic nonsense, but that night I saw my children's shadows clearly. Lisa's fear of being forgotten, Daniel's hunger for control, Michael's exhaustion from trying to hold peace in a war that never ends. By morning, they were gone. Only Michael left a note on the side table. "Please don't scare us again, Dad. We still need you." It made me laugh softly. Need me? Yes, but not in the way he thought. As the nurse came to check my vitals, I asked her, "Do families fight like this a lot around here?" She smiled knowingly. "Every day. But they always cry at the end." "Do they make peace?" I asked. "Sometimes," she said. "Sometimes they just learn to cry more quietly." That line stayed with me long after I was discharged, because maybe that's what family really is. Not love, not loyalty, just people learning how to cry in the same language. The day I left the hospital, the air outside felt heavier, like the world had changed shape while I was gone. My hands trembled as I gripped the car door, not from weakness, but from awareness. Mortality has a way of sharpening your vision. You start to see through people through words, even through yourself. Michael drove me home in silence, glancing at me every few seconds like I might disappear mid-turn. Lisa had sent flowers to my hospital room, but didn't show up for discharge. Daniel had texted glad, "You're okay, Dad. Let's talk soon." I didn't reply. The house felt emptier than before, though nothing had changed. The same smell of cedar floors, the same family portraits, the same creak of the hallway boards. Yet there was something else now, a quiet tension in the air, like the house itself was listening. I went straight to my study, unlocked the drawer, and pulled out the small key I hadn't touched in years. It belonged to a safety deposit box I'd opened right after my wife's death. Back then, I wasn't sure why I'd kept it. Now I knew exactly what it was for. You see, in my culture, there's an old tradition almost forgotten now, where elders would bury their virtue. They'd hide something valuable before death, not to deceive, but to test. The belief was simple. Whoever found it through honesty rather than greed was spiritually worthy to inherit it. My father had done something similar. After he died, we found an envelope of cash under the loose floorboard in his old shed, with a note that said, "If you needed this, you failed the test." I failed, of course. We all did. So now it was my turn. I called Peter Lang, my lawyer, the next morning. "Peter," I said, "I want to add one more layer to the plan." He sighed on the other end. "Another clause." "Not exactly. Something off the record." There was a pause. "Go on." "I'm setting up a separate account under my initials only. A small fortune. You'll keep the documents in the bank box under my name. And if, when I pass, you'll follow my instructions precisely." Peter chuckled. "You know, this is starting to sound like a treasure hunt." "Good," I said. "That's exactly what it is." That afternoon, I visited the bank. The manager greeted me with that well-practiced blend of courtesy and calculation banks reserve for old men with wealth. He led me to the vault area, a sterile corridor of gray walls and metallic echoes. The door to the deposit box clicked open with a sound that felt ceremonial. I placed inside it an envelope, a flash drive, and a handwritten note. The note read, "To my children, whatever you find here will reveal not what I had, but who you are. Each of you has a key, but only together can you open this box." I smiled to myself as I sealed it. A small part of me felt cruel, but a larger part felt alive. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about truth. Because families only tell the truth when there's something to gain or everything to lose. When I returned home, I wrote 3 letters, one for each child. They were nearly identical, except for a final line unique to each. Lisa's said, "Love isn't a currency, my dear. Stop trying to trade it. Daniel's control is a fragile kingdom. The more you hold, the less you have. Michael's peace is expensive, son. Don't buy it with silence." I sealed them carefully and placed them inside another envelope marked to be delivered upon my death. The irony of writing that while still breathing made me laugh softly. That night, as I sat in the garden, the same stars looked down indifferently. It occurred to me that everything I owned, houses, stocks, heirlooms, was meaningless compared to this tiny act of rebellion. The ultimate inheritance wasn't wealth. It was moral exposure. I was forcing them to confront who they'd become. I thought about Daniel and Lisa's argument in the hospital hallway. I thought about Michael's note by my bed. They were each flawed in such predictable ways that I couldn't blame them anymore. Maybe love was never meant to be equal. It just takes the shape of whoever needs it most. A moth circled the porch light, desperate and blind. I whispered, "That's us, isn't it? Chasing brightness we don't understand." The next morning I decided to test my own theory. I invited the 3 of them over again, claiming I wanted to celebrate my recovery. They came, of course. Families will always show up for appearances, if not affection. Lisa arrived first, bringing a fruit basket wrapped in gold ribbon. Daniel came with an expensive bottle of wine. Michael came empty-handed, though he carried a tired smile. We ate lunch, the conversation polite but stiff. Halfway through dessert, I cleared my throat and said, "I've opened a bank box." All 3 looked up instantly. I could almost hear their thoughts sink like gears in a clock. "It's not what you think," I added quickly. "Inside is something important. You'll each get a key soon, but you can only open it together. That's the condition." Daniel leaned forward. "Together? How?" "Like all 3 of us physically present." "Yes." Lisa frowned. "That's unusual." "So is family unity," I replied dryly. Michael smiled slightly, trying to break the tension. "Dad's making us work for it. It's like one of those escape room challenges." "Exactly," I said. "Except the room is your conscience." They didn't laugh. Not one of them. The air grew heavier and I could see suspicion taking root in their expressions. Lisa's eyes narrowed first. Daniel's fingers tapped the table. Michael's smile faded. "Well," Daniel said, standing up, "I guess we'll see what happens when the time comes." Lisa muttered, "Hopefully not soon." Hopefully not. I agreed, though part of me knew that my health was no longer a loyal ally. After they left, I locked the doors, returned to my study, and sat in silence. I could feel the weight of everything I'd set in motion. Maybe this was madness. Maybe this was wisdom. Hard to tell the difference when you've lived long enough to see both blend into one. I wrote one final note in my ledger before bed. I've given them something to chase, but not something to fight for. If they can't tell the difference, they'll lose it all. Then I turned off the light and let the darkness settle warm and absolute around me. It started subtly, like the first cracks in a glass, too small to notice, but already spreading. A few days after I revealed the bank box, the phone calls began. Lisa first, of course. "Dad," she said, her voice sugar-sweet. "I've been thinking, maybe we should all have dinner together, like the old days. No tension, no talk about the will, just family, just family." I almost laughed out loud. That phrase has been used to disguise more emotional crimes than I can count. But I agreed. because I knew this wasn't a peace offering, it was reconnaissance. A day later, Daniel texted Lisa, called me. "I'm in for dinner. Let's keep it civil." Then Michael, "Dad, I'm so glad we're all meeting again. Maybe this time, it'll be different." Different. Everyone always hopes for that. But families rarely change. They just adjust their performance. When Sunday came, I set the table myself. Roast beef potatoes, my wife's old apple pie recipe. I even lit candles because nostalgia is the best disguise for suspicion. When they arrived, they greeted each other with exaggerated politeness, hugging stiffly, laughing too loud. I almost admired the effort it takes talent to pretend you're not waiting for someone to die. Lisa brought flowers. Daniel brought wine again, this time cheaper than before. Michael brought a board game, his attempt to keep the peace through forced laughter. We sat down, and for the first 20 minutes, it actually felt normal. Talk about weather, about Michael's promotion, about Lisa's new coffee machine. Daniel told a joke about the economy that made no one laugh. But then, like a draft slipping under a closed door, tension crept in. So Lisa said casually, "Did anyone else find it odd that Dad mentioned a bank box the other day?" Daniel froze mid-bite. "You're bringing that up already. I'm just saying." "It's strange," she continued. "Why keep something secret if there's nothing to hide?" Michael sighed. "Lisa, please." "Can we not?" She ignored him. "I mean, we all have keys now, right? Or do we?" I sipped my wine, letting the silence simmer. Daniel's eyes flicked toward me. "Do we?" "Dad, eventually," I said calmly. "When it's time." Lisa leaned back. "And who decides when that is?" "You." "Yes," I replied. "I'm still alive, last I checked." She smiled tightly. "Of course. I just don't see why we have to wait. It's not like you'd put something dangerous in there." "Maybe I did," I said deadpan. Daniel rolled his eyes. "Come on, Dad." "I'm serious, Haji," I said. "It's dangerous to anyone who opens it for the wrong reasons." That shut them up for a moment. Michael broke the silence with a nervous laugh. "Okay, this is getting creepy. Can we just eat?" We did. But the laughter never returned. Every sentence that followed was carefully measured, every smile rehearsed. By dessert, they were performing an entire play, The Loving Family, written by denial, directed by greed. After dinner, they insisted on helping clean up. Lisa washed dishes, while Daniel dried and Michael hovered awkwardly with a towel he barely used. Watching them, I realized something cruel. They were finally cooperating, but not out of love, out of mutual paranoia. When the kitchen was spotless, Daniel asked, "So, Dad, just to be clear, there's no change in the will since your last visit to Peter, right?" Lisa snapped. "Oh, for God's sake, Daniel. Hey," he cut in, "you're the one digging for clues." "I'm just asking." Michael threw down the towel. "Can we stop pretending this dinner wasn't about the box? You both only came to figure out what's inside." The room fell silent again. The candles flickered like nervous witnesses. Lisa spoke first. "You think I care about that stupid box? Please." Daniel smirked. "You do. You just don't want to look desperate." Lisa's voice rose. "At least I'm not trying to manipulate Dad with fake concern, and at least I actually built something in my life," Daniel shot back. "Built?" She laughed bitterly. "You mean inherited a business you didn't create?" I'd seen this fight coming the moment they entered the door. But this time, I didn't stop them. I let it happen. Families purge truth through argument, not therapy. Michael turned to me desperate. "Dad, say something." I met his eyes calm as stone. "What would you like me to say?" "Anything make them stop." "No," I said quietly. "They need to hear themselves." For a moment, no one moved. Then Daniel threw his napkin on the table. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I'm just finally learning how to listen." He shook his head, disgusted. You're playing with us, Dad. You always have. You act wise, but you're just pulling strings." Lisa crossed her arms. "He's right. You want us to fight. That's why you made that stupid game with the box." I smiled faintly. "If I wanted you to fight, I wouldn't have to try so hard." Michael whispered, "This is insane." I looked at each of them one by one and said, "You know what's insane? That 3 adults can't sit in the same room without measuring each other's worth in dollars. I'm not testing your greed. I'm testing your memory. I want to see if you remember who we were before all this." Daniel laughed coldly. "We remember, Dad. That's the problem." They left soon after slamming doors and muttering accusations under their breath. Only Michael lingered. "You're making them crazy," he said softly. "They were already crazy," I replied. "I'm just turning on the light." He looked at me sadly. "And what if the light burns everything down?" "Then maybe it should," I said. "Maybe ashes are the only way to start clean." He nodded slowly, kissed my forehead, and left. The house went quiet again. I walked to the window, watching the tail lights disappear down the street. My reflection stared back, an old man with too many plans and too few years. I wondered if I'd crossed a line somewhere, if this experiment had become cruelty. But then I remembered what my father used to say. If love can't survive, truth, it's already dead. I wrote one final note before bed. Reconciliation is the performance we give when the audience is inheritance. Then I blew out the candles and listened to the sound of my own heart, steady, but tired, beating like a clock that knows its time is running out. The house grew quieter after that night. Not peaceful, just empty in a way that made silence feel heavier. I could almost hear the absence of voices like ghosts that refused to rest. The dinner had changed something in all of them. Daniel stopped calling altogether. Lisa switched to short text messages, sterile, polite, meaningless. Michael visited once, then less often. I didn't blame him. It's exhausting to be the peacemaker in a war that keeps renewing its weapons. But I was still the father, still the one who'd built this battlefield. So I decided it was time to leave something behind, something more honest than a will, colder than a letter, sharper than advice. That's when I bought the recorder, a small, cheap thing from a dusty electronics store. The cashier asked if I needed batteries, and I almost said, "No, I have enough energy left for one more confession." I spent the evening in my study, staring at it on the desk. It looked harmless, like a toy. But the moment I pressed record, the air changed. It felt like I'd invited truth to sit across from me. I spoke plainly at first. "If you're hearing this," I said, "it means I'm gone." My voice startled me, older than I remembered, brittle around the edges. "You've probably already opened the bank box. You've probably already accused each other of something. Maybe you've cried, or maybe you've laughed. Maybe you're relieved. I don't know. But I do know this: you've misunderstood everything." I paused, letting the static hum between words. It reminded me of breathing, labored, uneven, alive. "You think this was about money?" It wasn't. It was about memory, about seeing if you still had one that included me, not as a source, but as a person. I looked around the room while I spoke. Every object seemed to watch me. The old clock, the bookshelf, the framed wedding photo of your mother and me. I told them about the day she and I bought this house, how we laughed because the roof leaked and we couldn't afford to fix it. I told them about how Lisa used to sneak cookies into her pockets, how Daniel once spent an entire summer trying to build a treehouse but quit halfway, and how Michael used to hide behind the curtains just to listen to our arguments, because he hated not knowing what was wrong. "You were all so different," I said softly, "and so beautiful. But somewhere between growing up and growing apart, you forgot that love isn't proof. Its presence. Then I leaned closer to the recorder and whispered, "And presence doesn't come from being in the will. It comes from showing up when there's nothing to gain." I pressed stop, then play, then delete, then recorded it again, this time slower, more deliberate. I wanted my words to weigh something. When it was done, I sealed the recorder in an envelope labeled "For the reading of the will." I gave it to Peter the next morning. He frowned as I explained. "So you want me to play this after they open the bank box?" "Yes," I said. "Think of it as the fuse." He sighed. "You realize this could cause more harm than good, right?" I smiled. "That depends on what you think harm is." He looked at me for a long time before saying, "You're not just writing a will, Mr. Carter. You're orchestrating a morality play." "Exactly," I said. "But unlike most plays, the actors don't know they're performing." As I left his office, I passed a mother and her teenage son in the waiting area. They were arguing in low voices about college funds. The boy muttered, "You don't trust me," and she said, "I trust you to be human." That line hit me like lightning, because that's all I ever wanted, to trust my children to be human. Not perfect, not obedient, just human. That night I couldn't sleep. The moonlight crept across my bedroom floor, pale and intrusive. I kept thinking about the tape. What if they laughed at it? What if they dismissed it as manipulation? Or worse, what if it broke them completely? I got up, went to the study, and pressed record one last time. "If you're still listening," I said, "then maybe you're finally ready. The truth is, I don't care what you do with my money. Spend it, burn it, give it away. I won't know and I won't judge. What matters is what you become afterward. Because inheritance isn't wealth, it's reflection. What you do with what's left says more about you than anything I could have written." Then I added quieter, "I love you. Even if you never understand that this was my way of saying it." I ended the recording there. The next morning I drove to the park, the same one I used to take them to as children. I sat on the bench where your mother once read novels while the kids played tag. I could still hear the laughter if I tried hard enough. I took out my notebook and wrote one final line. "I've built my own time capsule of guilt, truth, and affection. Let it explode only when they're ready to be honest." Then I closed the book, folded the page, and watched as a group of children ran past their parents, chasing behind shouting warnings, laughter, and love, all tangled together. For a moment, I envied them the simplicity of care, the unawareness of endings. But envy fades fast when you've lived long enough to understand that every beginning is already a rehearsal for goodbye. When I got home, I placed the recorder inside my desk drawer and smiled. The tape wasn't just a message, it was a mirror. And when the time came, they'd finally have to look. The end came quieter than I imagined. No dramatic collapse, no hospital beeps, no grand goodbye. Just an ache behind my ribs that whispered, "It's time." It was autumn now, the air thick with the scent of rain and decaying leaves. I woke early one morning and felt it in my bones. This was the day for the final dinner, the Last Supper. I didn't call it that, of course. I just told them, "Come by tonight. I want to eat together once more." They all agreed instantly. Perhaps guilt has its own calendar. The day passed in a blur of preparation. I cooked everything myself, even though my hand shook when I held the knife. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, carrots with honey glaze, and the last apple pie recipe your mother ever wrote down. The kitchen smelled like memory, warm, deceptive, familiar. I set 4 plates at the table, polished the silverware, lit 3 candles. Each flame stood straight and still, like witnesses waiting for confession. When the doorbell rang, I already knew who it would be first. Michael. Always Michael. He came in quietly, carrying a small bag of groceries I didn't need. "You look good, Dad," he said softly. "Liar," I replied with a grin, "but I'll take it." Lisa arrived next, looking elegant, defensive, and faintly fragile. She hugged me without warmth, then adjusted her hair in the hallway mirror. Daniel came last, punctual to a fault, smelling of cologne and impatience. When they were all seated, I poured wine and raised my glass. "To family," I said. They echoed it half-heartedly. Dinner began politely, almost beautifully. They complimented the food, asked about my health, even teased each other lightly. For a moment it was almost believable, like the family we used to be dressed up and resurrected for one night. But truth has poor manners. It always shows up uninvited. So Daniel said after a while, carving his chicken carefully, "Peter called me today." Lisa's eyes darted up. "Why?" "He said there's been some confusion about the documents. Apparently there's a tape." Michael froze. "A tape?" I smiled faintly. "Ah, so the fuse has finally reached the match." Lisa frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I said that tomorrow Peter will play you something I left behind." "A message?" Daniel leaned back. "So you are leaving surprises?" "Of course," I said. "Every story deserves a twist." Michael looked uneasy. "Dad, why not just tell us now?" "Because," I said gently, "you wouldn't listen. You'd only react." The room fell silent except for the faint crackle of candle flames. Lisa's eyes glistened, whether from frustration or fear, I couldn't tell. "Do you enjoy this?" she asked quietly. Watching us tear each other apart, I met her gaze. "No. I'm trying to make you see what I see." Daniel scoffed. "What, that we're greedy? That we're monsters? Fine, Dad, you win. But guess what? Every parent creates their children's monsters. You raised us to fight for everything." "That's true," I said softly. "But I didn't think you'd start fighting for me before I was gone." Michael slammed his fork down. "Enough, please. This isn't what Mom would have wanted." The mention of her name cracked something inside the air. Lisa's hand trembled. Daniel looked away. I took a deep breath. "Your mother," I said, "believed that love could survive anything." I believed her too. Until I watched you three at my hospital bed, Dad. Lisa began. "No," I interrupted gently. "Let me finish. You see, when I collapsed, I thought about how strange it is that death brings people closer, but not because of love, because of urgency. Suddenly, everyone remembers how to care when time runs out. But it's fake, temporary. You think you're healing, but you're just negotiating guilt." They stared at me silent. Only the clock on the wall dared to speak, ticking too loudly, too honestly. I reached under the table and pulled out 3 small envelopes. "These are for you," I said. "Don't open them yet. They're not money. They're words." Lisa reached first. "Dad." "Shh," I said. "I'm not done." I took a sip of wine, my hand trembling slightly. "Tomorrow, when Peter plays that tape, you'll learn something about yourselves. You might hate me for it. Maybe you already do. But I need you to understand everything I did was love in disguise." Daniel scoffed. "Love? You call this love?" "Yes," I said, "because love isn't always kind. Sometimes it's the only weapon left that still means well." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, stop talking like this." "I can't," I said. "If I stop now, it'll all stay unfinished." The candles flickered one by one like they too were struggling to stay alive. Lisa's voice cracked. "What's going to be on the tape?" I smiled faintly. "The truth, the kind that doesn't care about your version or mine." No one spoke after that. We finished dinner in silence. When they stood to leave, I hugged each of them. Daniel stiffened. Lisa trembled. Michael clung. None of them realized it was the last time. After they left, I sat at the table surrounded by the remains of the meal. The wine had gone flat, the candles melted into small puddles of wax. I looked at the empty chairs and whispered, "You all still think it's about what you'll get. You have no idea what you've already lost." I walked slowly to the window. Outside, the street was quiet, the world dim and indifferent. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and fell silent. I pressed my palm against the glass, cold against my skin, and watched my reflection blur. In families like ours, silence becomes inheritance long before money ever does. I went to bed early, the letter I'd written to Peter resting on the nightstand. It said simply, "Play the tape. Give them their envelopes. And don't interfere when the truth begins to feed on them." The last thought I remember before sleep was of my wife's laughter, clear, kind, and so distant that it almost hurt. I whispered her name once, twice, then let the darkness take me gently. The next morning the sun rose to find me still in bed, eyes closed, face calm, heart finally tired of choosing sides. They would find me later that day. They would cry, they would argue, they would open the envelopes, and the tape would play. And maybe, just maybe, they would finally understand that I hadn't left them a will. I'd left them a mirror. Hey guys, if you're still here after all that, thank you. Tonight's story wasn't just about inheritance. It was about how love can get buried under the weight of expectation, how silence can become louder than any argument. Maybe you saw a bit of your own family in mine. Maybe you've felt that strange ache of giving everything and realizing it still wasn't enough. I told this story as a father, but really it belongs to anyone who's ever tried to hold a family together while watching it drift apart. In the end, it's not the money, the house, or the will that matters. It's the memories we leave behind, the words we never said, the dinners that turned into goodbyes. So if you have someone you still need to forgive, do it before the candles burn out. If there's someone you love, tell them before time does it for you. And if this story stayed with you even just a little, then maybe that's the real inheritance we all share, the ability to remember, to feel, and to start again. Good night, my friends. Take care of your hearts, and thank you for listening.